Brent, these next few questions are for you, but anybody's welcome to add in as we go through. How difficult was it getting the magazine ready from month to month, since you were the one that kind of had that? And for those who didn't know the technology back then, what kind of did y'all have to use for that back then?
Well, it was a grind for sure, and I usually ended up working pretty late at night trying to get all of that done at different times. And of course, the deadline of getting it out, if we decided to go somewhere as a family, I had to figure out how I was going to get that finished into the printer before we got away. So that was always a difficult thing to get done. But I enjoyed working with it, of course. It was a great thing to do. And of course, part of the problem was that everything had to be done and pasted up into place in order to go. We started on this, there were no computers. Ed probably had one at the university, but I'm sure none of the rest of us did when we started this. So it was a lot of work involved in it.
Any advice for today's layout editors with the changes in technology or any of that?
I think everybody's pretty well adapted to the new technology, and it really is a blessing to work with electronic files and that sort of thing. It's made it much more easier.
I really think too that Brent's creativity had a lot to do with the early success of the paper. It was different enough, and yet it was good looking enough that it really was appealing to people.
What were some of the things that influenced your decisions on design?
Well, I just always had an interest in it, and I never had any training in it. I just kind of observed what was done in different media and sort of adapted what looked like to me would work. So I just always had an interest in that. I got typesetting equipment fairly early, all the way back to of course, the IBM Selectric typewriter was the first thing back in the middle to late 60s. And then from that, IBM developed a compositor, they called it, which was the IBM Selectric style or method of doing that, but it had much more of a typesetting feel to it and so forth. So I had an interest in it and developed from that.
What's the story behind the sketches?
The sketches were done by a fellow in Lubbock where I was living, and we all liked them until we found a few people who didn't. At least I think we did. The initial reaction was pretty good.
What was it that somebody compared Ed's sketch to?
I don't know, but it would have to have been an improvement, wouldn't it?
Robert Redford?
I knew we shouldn't have left.
Yeah, that's right. You played the straight man there.
Any typos, embarrassing moments from typos that you remember that stood out to you?
Well, the one thing that I do remember, Paul probably remembers, I was always pretty good at spelling. And I took one of his articles, and the word was Pharisaic or Pharisaism or something like that, and I misspelled it all the way through. I changed his correct spelling to the spelling that I thought was correct and got it wrong. That one I'll never live down, at least with Paul. But I don't remember a whole lot more. I do think I ended up correcting more errors than I did making errors, at least in that regard.
Oh, absolutely.
Did you ever ask Ed for a bigger budget?
I did, but it didn't work out that way.
Well, we all got paid probably what we
wanted. Yeah, that's right.
The and then some column. I don't guess I have any other layout questions, but the and then some column had a wide variety of quotations from other authors. From what I've been able to tell, the reading that I've been able to do. What was your process for composing that column? What was on your reading list?
Well, I just read everything I could get my hands on that I had time to read, and I always read, when I was doing that, I always read with a view to something that might work, you know, that would help in that regard. So there wasn't anything in particular that I remember, but I was always aware of that. I'm sure these other fellows were aware of things. I know some of the things that Ed wrote for his reviews column were just things that happened, you know, and he's real good at picking up on things that happen and making a good point out of it. So I was kind of that way in regard to those things.
Brother Dee, I'm going to talk to you. You want to tell us about That's Life? Did you do a column like that in a church bulletin, or What was the idea behind that, or?
No, the first That's Life was done for the magazine. I never had done that before. I always liked small bits and pieces so that you could get a little thought out of some little thing. And I like numerically placed things because I think it gives a little bit of definition. And so I just began to do that, just to do the magazine. I took it to Brent first and told him what I kind of had in mind, and I called it, I forgot what I did.
You called it
Life, just Life. And Brent came up with the idea of calling it That's Life. And so I began to do it, and it really just kind of evolved out of the kind of way my mediocre thinking goes. I just like the simple things. Again, I can't emphasize too strongly that all of us did our columns with a view in mind to the people, to making something that people could take, even if it was just a little germ that would initiate some kind of new thought that they had, or even if it would be some little motivational thing that would put into being some course of life that they would not have had otherwise, maybe. And we were all interested in that sort of thing. And I think all of our columns behind all of our columns was an effort to try to help people understand the Word of God. We never got very far from the Bible. We just wanted to do things for the people with the Bible.
And those columns have been reprinted into 2 books?
There are 2 books, yes, sir. And they've been well received by people. It's not on the New York Times bestseller list or anything like that, but people have been mighty sweet to read it.
And have most of the articles, most of the pages been reprinted in those books?
I'm not sure that I'd say most of them. All of that came out of there, but I took the ones that I thought were the better ones. And again, I leaned on my buddy here, Brent, to help me figure those out.
Your first article in the paper was Latch On to the
No, I didn't. I don't have anything to do with that article.
I know you've been criticized for that, so you want to talk about that?
Well, I know that we've been criticized some, and of course Ed was the first editor, and it coincided with what positive Christianity is all about. The problem I found with people's criticism of the article is very simple, and that is I used a kind of a little gimmick that you use sometimes in journalism, where you start out with a thing and make a bookend at the other end of it. I started the article, if people would listen to look at it carefully, I started the article by saying that sin is inherently negative and the gospel is inherently positive. I went through and tried to show that what we need to do is accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative and latch on to the affirmative. And before I was through 3 months after that article, I wish that I had never heard of Johnny Mercer, who wrote the song Accentuate the Positive. But I still have no problem with the article. If I were asked to do it again, I think I would do it precisely the same way. In the middle of the article, it says I'm not advocating rah-rah religion or feel-good religion. It was an effort to try to accentuate the gospel and eliminate sin.